And we are recording with Mr. Joseph Sweeney on Wednesday, December 4th, 2024 at 11:07 a.m. Eastern Time. 15 years ago today, the Hell Week of the fraternity I pledged up as a freshman in college ended. And I experienced true happiness. And I just I did this date's burning in my brain. I just saw that like flashback. Um, but, I suppose in the future we might look back to, the last month or so. And for everybody listening, you can go grab the book Dangerous Injustice in the description. You and I have done one show before. It was fantastic. The book is fantastic because you laid out, kind of all the cases and the I don't know, the excuses, the lies held behind, secrecy and national security to do outright criminal things, but draped in the flag and told, and, that the peasants don't need to know. And you kind of dived into all of that and how murky it is. And I think against all odds, Donald Trump had won the election despite the dangerous injustice to shamelessly plug your book. But it is a fantastic book, and I would ask everyone to please go grab it. Um, yeah, I don't know where to go from here. Please introduce yourself real quick, Mr. Sweeney, for the people who maybe don't know who you are.
Sure. For those who don't know me, my name is Joe Sweeney. I had 35 years in federal service. I did 10 years in the U.S. Army, 4 years at West Point, 6 years as an airborne ranger, qualified infantry officer. And then I got out of the Army and went to law school. And after law school, I went right back into the government. I went to work in the CIA Office of General Counsel, where I did 25 years. I retired as what's called a Senior Intelligence Service 4, which is the civilian equivalent of a 2 or 3 star general. I had an unusual career in the CIA General Counsel's office because half of my career was spent in the litigation division. And so I was a line attorney, I was a deputy, I was an acting chief, and then I was chief of litigation for over 4 years. And because of all that experience working on national security litigation cases every day, civil and criminal, I have a unique level of experience in working with any type of federal case, criminal or civil, that involves classified information. I either wrote the book on how to handle the issues or I improved on the book. Um, and during my career, I worked on many espionage cases. Uh, Not just prosecutions, but during my career, I also served in operational components as the legal advisor, and I was the legal advisor to the Counterintelligence Center in the CIA, which included the Counterespionage Group, which are the folks who focus exclusively on trying to ferret out double agents, right? Looking for
Mm.
our own people who are stealing our secrets. And those are very difficult cases because the people you're targeting are trained intelligence officers who
Yeah,
know your tradecraft, right? These
yeah,
people are trained to spot surveillance.
yeah.
How are you going to surveil them, right? And so those were very, very sensitive cases. And I write about some of them in my book. And so I've handled espionage cases right from their inception, right? Through early investigation, through mature investigation being led by the FBI, and then working with federal prosecutors for arrest, detaining, and using classified information as evidence in the prosecutions. And I tell two stories in the book of two cases that went to trial that I worked on. Um, both of which were on 60 Minutes, episodes on 60 Minutes that you can see on YouTube. Um, and so working all those cases, I I also got experience with other types of espionage cases. So, the ones I was just talking about, those are what we would call classic espionage, right? Where we catch foreigners trying to steal our secrets, usually by paying some of our own people who succumb to their persuasiveness, usually because of financial need. Those are classic espionage cases. That's the kind of stuff you see in the movies.
Robert
But I also worked on cases.
Hansen. Sorry, Hansen, right?
Yes. Yep. Hansen, Ames, some of the big traders in our nation's history. Um, uh, you could go all the way back to the Rosenbergs, who stole our nuclear
Mm-hmm.
secrets and
Klaus
actually gave them
Fuchs.
to the
Yeah.
Soviets.
Yeah.
That's how the Soviets got the atomic bomb. And in
Yeah.
fact, the
We cooked
Rosenbergs
them.
were,
Yeah.
yeah,
Ethel
they were
Rosenberg. Yeah. We
executed.
cooked them. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but there were also, there's another category of espionage cases, and that is when senior government officials mishandle classified information. It could either be they purposefully mishandled it, or they were just grossly negligent in how they handled it. And so there are only four of those cases in our nation's history. And I worked on three of them.
Yeah.
And I talked about them quite a bit last
Yeah.
time. I'll just mention the names now. And if we end up going back into the details, that's fine. But they were John Deutsch, who was Clinton's director of Central Intelligence. Then there was Sandy Berger, who was Clinton's national security advisor. Then there was David Petraeus, who was the director of the CIA. And then there was, of course, Hillary Clinton. And I'm one of the few people who's actually read the fabled Clinton emails.
Yeah.
And so those are the precedents where senior government officials were investigated or prosecuted. And I can tell you just generally, they were all treated very leniently, right? Either it was Hillary Clinton, who was not charged at all, despite being absolutely grossly negligent and also willfully retaining classified information, uh, or the other folks who were also engaging in willful conduct in mishandling classified information, and they got plea agreements that were probation and fines, and that's it. So they got treated very gently by the Department of Justice. And the other thing, the commonality between them all, in addition to them being senior government officers, they were all Democrats. And most of them were being investigated or prosecuted by Democratic Party administrations, which in part explains the lenience, right?
Mm.
And as I say in my book, you cannot analyze these cases without analyzing the politics,
Mm.
because the politics are what drove the investigations and drove the lenient prosecutions, not the law. And so those were the precedents. And again, I talk about them in great detail in the book. I would encourage people to read it. Those precedents, they're fascinating stories,
Mm.
not just legally, not just politically, but even just at the human interest level. There's some fascinating stories in there. So again, that was my experience, right? Working on those types of cases among other things, many other things involving classified information and the federal courts. Now, I was retired for about 1 year when Mar-a-Lago was raided. And because of my experience in this area, I was fascinated by this. And I've also been a student of American history my whole life. My dad taught American history, and I majored in American history at West Point. And this was, the raid on Mar-a-Lago was just historically unprecedented. Nothing like it had ever occurred in our nation's history, nothing even close to it. The home of a former president of the United States being raided by 30 FBI agents, armed and authorized to use deadly
Shoot to
force.
kill. Yeah.
Yes, it's just unbelievable. And not only was that done, it was done by the opposing political party. After President Biden had said that Trump was, an existential threat to democracy, and he chided his attorney general for not being aggressive enough in trying to prosecute Trump. And so there I am. I'm retired. I have time on my hands, and I know these types of cases better than maybe anyone in the world, having worked on them from the inside and worked on most of them from the inside. I started researching. And what I found just blew my mind. With every stone I unturned, I found more and more malfeasance by the Biden administration, right? They were twisting the laws, using the laws in a way they had never been interpreted, never used. They were twisting the facts. With every stone I unturned. In my book, the subtitle is how the Democrats weaponized DOJ to protect Biden and persecute Trump. And even though the focus is on DOJ and the FBI, I can tell you it was much greater than that. And I do get into this a bit in the book. Even the National Archives was weaponized against Trump.
That's
Um,
that's wild.
it's so
Like,
wild. And I'm a former government lawyer. I read regulations, and so I pulled up the regulations for the National Archives. They deviated from their regulations just to stick it to Trump. If there was something in their regs that said, "Oh, a former president gets 90 days to review," blah blah blah. Oh no, they turned it into like 7 days. Now and I will say that wasn't unlawful on their part because the National Archives has the power to deviate from their regulations, but they only did it to hurt Trump, right? And that's
yeah,
obvious.
yeah,
So the weaponization went far beyond the FBI and DOJ. Really, the entire, the Biden administration, I believe, weaponized the entire executive branch against conservatives and Trump in particular. And I'm not just throwing around rhetoric. I did extensive research for my book, and I think I back up all the criticism. I do criticize the Biden administration and the Democratic Party very heavily, but I believe I back up every criticism with facts and data. And I encourage people, I've got a website, sweeneyjb.com, and I tell people, if you think I got anything wrong, if you think I have levied a criticism that is unfair, write me because I want to hear it. I do get a lot of emails, and I respond to every single one. Most of them, of course, are from like-minded people, but I also enjoy talking to people who don't think like me. And I don't mind criticism. I'm sure my book isn't perfect, but my goal was to back up every criticism that I had. So for any of your listeners, if they think I got something wrong, please reach out to me through the website. There's a contact form. So I start researching after the raid on Mar-a-Lago, and it was very interesting in that the Biden administration was fighting tooth and nail to keep as much as possible off the public record, which was shocking. Here they had engaged in something which had never been done before. And I originally thought, well, they're going to want to be transparent to the American people and tell them, why they took such an unprecedented and unique and aggressive action against a former president. That didn't happen. And what they were doing is they were engaging in propaganda. They were claiming that they were being transparent by putting this and that and the other and certain documents on the public record. But all of those documents were meaningless and devoid of substance. The one document that was heavily substantive was the FBI affidavit supporting the raid on Mar-a-Lago. That is how the FBI put facts before the magistrate to show to the magistrate that they had probable cause to raid the home of a former president. And that's in a sworn affidavit. And I was waiting for that to be put on the public record. The Biden administration fought that tooth and nail, again, for as long as they could. But eventually, a heavily redacted version was put on the public record. Now, even though it was heavily redacted, most of the redactions were for the actual probable cause. In other words, who their sources were telling them, this, that, or the other. A large portion of the affidavit was not redacted, and that is the part where the FBI was explaining classified information generally to the magistrate, and then some of the specific information classified that they thought was at issue in the case, which is what I really wanted to see, because I have drafted hundreds of those types of affidavits explaining those very things to federal judges for decades, and I've supervised the drafting of probably thousands of them. And I, again, could not believe what I read.
mm,
They misrepresented the law. There were, I'll give you a couple examples. They described to the magistrate a president's relationship with classified information in this type of language. They said that the president had lawful access to classified information. Well, that's like saying parents have lawful access to their children. It's not wrong, but it doesn't even come close to describing the actual relationship.
Yeah.
And I go into great detail in my book for those who don't know anything about classified information. And I think I explain it all at a level that anyone could understand because classified information is classified pursuant to presidential power. The president creates classified information and owns it from cradle to grave. And so you would never know that, however, when you read the FBI affidavit supporting the raid on Mar-a-Lago. Um, Now, there were some other interesting aspects of the affidavit. And again, I don't have time to get into all of them. They didn't even properly describe the standard for classification under the executive order. They even got that wrong, which just blew my mind because it's one of the most basic things.
It just
Um,
the tells of just sloppy, botched, just
exactly. It
kind of
it
devil
just
may
reeks
care.
of sloppiness. And for something of this nature, you know that affidavit had to be reviewed by layers upon layers of attorneys in the FBI and DOJ. And they didn't even get the standard right for classification. Now, even though they redacted a lot of the factual information about how they were getting probable cause, what you can see from the affidavit are the two primary areas for probable cause, what they were, the laws that they said were being violated. One of them was the Espionage Act, for mishandling classified. The other one was the Presidential Records Act, which again just floored me. The Presidential Records Act is a civil statute. It has absolutely no criminal provisions, none. It's not even a criminal law. And it has no enforcement mechanism against a president or vice president, current or former. The whole thing is really just a guide to the president uh, to aid in guide a president in their determinations of what is going to be a personal record and what is going to be a presidential record. Uh, uh,
It's just like a
and the fact that they
formality.
would, the
So
fact that the FBI relied on what they said was a violation of a civil law to do a criminal search. I'd never seen anything like it in my life. I don't know if it's ever occurred before. I would suspect and hope that it hasn't. And tellingly, when they eventually got around to indicting Trump, there is no mention of the Presidential Records Act anywhere in that indictment. And that's because it's not a criminal law.
mm,
And yet, it was one of the primary bases that the FBI relied on to do a criminal search of a former president's home. That is completely
that's
egregious.
insane. That's like that's like if the FBI raided this apartment because I do podcasts with guys like you or Delta Force members, and they're like, by the transitive property, you also might be, I don't know, a threatening guerrilla. I'd be like, what
Oh,
in
it's even
God's
worse.
name are
It's
you
even worse.
doing?
It's worse. It's as if the FBI would raid your apartment because you took the tags off your mattress.
Yeah,
Right? That's how bad it
because I
is.
didn't floss. It's like you don't even have to. It's just recommended. Like,
Yeah, and let me explain a little more
yeah,
background that illustrates how egregious this really was. There's not a lot of case law interpreting the Presidential Records Act. There may be a dozen people in the world who actually understand that statute. I wouldn't even pretend to be an expert on it because you don't need to be. But after Bill Clinton's presidency, there was in fact a litigation over the Presidential Records Act because what Clinton did after his presidency, he retained audio recordings of Clinton in the Oval Office talking to his ghostwriter. Uh, some of those recordings were capturing Clinton's discussions with foreign heads of state. Those discussions would presumptively be classified at the secret level, but even putting aside the classification, they would normally be considered presidential records because they were documenting Clinton's work as president of the United States. Now, there was an entity called Judicial Watch who sued the National Archives, and they said, hey, Clinton kept these tapes. In fact, they were in a sock drawer in his bedroom. And they said Clinton should have given these tapes to the archives. You should have gotten these tapes from Clinton. And they filed a lawsuit to try and compel the National Archives to retrieve these recordings from Clinton. And so the court looked at this, and it's actually a very well-written judicial opinion. I've read it numerous times, and I find no fault in it, even though it's aggressive, because what the court concluded was the court had absolutely no jurisdiction to determine what is a presidential record and what is a personal record, right? And what the court held was that there's only one person in the world who gets to determine what is a presidential record and what is a personal record. And that person is the president. And the president's decision is unreviewable by a federal court. That was the holding in that case. And in fact, that's what DOJ argued in that case, that the National Archives had absolutely no duty to go and retrieve records. And in that case, DOJ and the court both assumed that Clinton had decided these tapes were personal records by the mere fact that he kept them. Nobody even asked him, hey, was this just a mistake? Did you mean to keep these as personal records, or should these have been turned over as presidential records? The mere fact that he kept them meant that they were personal records as far as DOJ was concerned and as far as the court was concerned. And actually, if you read the statute, that's how it's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And if Congress tried to pass a law telling the executive exactly how to keep their records, well, that law would be unconstitutional for a violation of separation of powers. And so the bottom line is, this is all background just to prove that the courts have looked at this. And what they determined was that what's a presidential record and what's a personal record is up to the president. And if a president kept something, well, they just automatically assumed as a legal matter that was a personal record. Okay. Right. So that's the background on the Presidential Records Act. Now, you would never know any of that when you read the FBI affidavit, which makes it sound like this violation of the Presidential Record Act is so egregious, we have to go into the former president's home with guns
to get a box of documents to go get this. Yeah.
Yeah. It's patently ridiculous.
Well, like the FBI raiding me for mattress tags, anyone with a brain would go, yeah, there's a different motive.
Yeah, anyone with a brain, and yet half of our
any
country
modicum of
supported that action.
maturity. Yeah, just like
well, I dedicate a whole chapter in my book to talking about my conversations with my neighbors, because I live in Washington, D.C. D.C. is a stronghold, the stronghold for the Democratic Party. DC voted 93% for Kamala Harris in the recent election. Yeah. They voted 93% just about for Joe Biden in 2020. So this is the stronghold. All my neighbors are Democrats. And I relate in my book many of the conversations I was having with them from 2016 forward, because look, these are good people. I love them. They're my neighbors. They're good folks, but they all have level 5 Trump derangement syndrome. And no matter how educated you are, if you have level 5 TDS, you suffer from an extreme level of hubris and hypocrisy, and you cannot think rationally when it comes to Donald J. Trump, right? Because he's the devil, he's Hitler. Yeah. And anything you do to get after the devil is justified, right? The ends justify the means. And so half the country supported the raid on Mar-a-Lago, said nothing, didn't care. Why? Because it was Trump. Who cares, right? Who cares? That was the attitude when it was just patently ridiculous on its face. And that's just looking at it in isolation, right? When it wasn't done in isolation, it was along a spectrum of numerous unlawful actions that were taken to target Trump all the way back to his campaign in 2016. And I document some of these in my book. It's not the primary focus of the book, but I go all the way back to what I call the Russia collusion hoax coup, which was unlawfully using very aggressive intelligence collection mechanisms to target the Trump campaign. And all based on political propaganda and rhetoric, not fact. It was egregious all the way back to 2016. Um, yes, any rational person could see that, any reasonable person, and yet half the country supported it. And so that's what got me interested in writing the book, right? At first, I was just writing things just for my own sanity,
Hmm.
just because I'm in retirement, I'm researching this stuff, I'm a lawyer, and I started writing. And then I thought, maybe I could write an article on this because some people might want to know the truth. Granted, none of my neighbors want to know the truth. No one in the Democratic Party wanted to know the truth, but maybe some people care. And so I thought I'd write an article. Then there was the indictment. And so my article started getting longer and I had to criticize the indictment. I'll get into that in a minute. And then and then Biden got caught with classified information. Then he got caught with more classified, and then he got caught with more classified. And so by the time I started analyzing all of these things, the indictment of Trump and then the cover up of Biden's malfeasance, at that point I had a book. And so it took me 2 years to write the book. There's a lot of research. Even the cases I worked on, I went back, had to refresh my recollection. There's a lot that's on the public record. But you have to have the eye to understand what you're seeing. And there's very few people in the world that have the experience I have from working on these types of cases. And so there I am, and I'm just uniquely situated to see not just that this is bad, but how bad it really is. And that's what motivated me, to put pen to paper and start writing. So when Trump gets indicted, I look at the indictment, and it's even worse than the raid affidavit in the way that it manipulates the law, bends the law past the breaking point, comes up with unique interpretations of the law. And it's obvious this is all being done to make Trump's conduct illegal when he did nothing illegal. Let me give you a few examples. I talked earlier about what I call the classic espionage cases, right? Where we catch foreigners uh, paying our people usually to steal secrets for a foreign country, and our people are acting as double agents, usually again for money. In those cases, when they are indicted, those traitors are indicted under the Espionage Act, right? For stealing classified information, basically. And the indictment would have one count of espionage, because that's all you need. One count. For classic spying, right? People who are purposefully trying to harm our country in exchange for money. One count under the Espionage Act. Look at Trump's indictment. 32 counts under the Espionage Act. They literally cherry-picked 32 documents and charged him individually for each document. We don't even do that for
Not
spies
double
that we
jeopardy.
catch.
Is that double jeopardy?
No, I'm because double jeopardy is when you prosecute someone more than once for the same crime.
Got it.
They just broke it down into 32 different felonies, which is something we don't even do against foreign spies. That fact alone kind of tells you everything you need to know about
Yeah.
the indictment against Trump. But in order to get there, and this was also fascinating for me looking at this with the eyes of an insider. Um, in order to charge him at all under the Espionage Act, DOJ had to find a way to label Trump's retention of classified documents as unauthorized. Because if it's not unauthorized, there's no charges under the Espionage Act. They just go away. At least under the portion of the statute that they decided to charge him under, which was the only one they thought they could get him on. Trust me, they thought they had more than that, they would have charged more. But under that portion of the Espionage Act in which they charged him, and this is Section 793 of the Espionage Act, it was E or F, I can't remember, maybe D. It's a big statute. The retention had to be unauthorized, and that's a very tricky legal area because all those documents went to Trump's home when he was still president.
Hmm.
And he didn't even pack the damn boxes. His staffers did. There is no allegation in the indictment that Trump even knew what was in the boxes. Think about that. But they had to label it unauthorized. And so what they did was they went to this arcane area of the executive order that governs classified information that says that if you're a former president and you want to gain access to classified information, you have to ask permission from the current president. And that makes sense. You know, let's say you retire, you're sitting home in East Dog Breath, Nebraska, and you want to write a book. And in order to write your book, you want to have access to some classified that you had access to back when you were president. And this happens, by the way. And vice presidents and presidents are permitted to visit the National Archives. They're brought into a secure area. They're permitted to look at some documents that they want to refresh their recollection on for when they write a book. It happens. Well, that's the statute. That's the portion of the executive order that they relied on to say that Trump's retention was unauthorized. And it doesn't even fit the circumstances because he wasn't a former president trying to seek access to things that he didn't have. He was just a former president that had boxes with stuff already in it that went to his house while he was still president, which would make them presidential acts for which presidents have immunity. Now, even putting aside the immunity ruling, which came after the indictment, he should have never been indicted for boxes that were sent to his house while he was still president. And immediately when I read the indictment for the first time, that's what I was looking for. When did these documents leave the White House? Now, there's no doubt that the special counsel, Jack Smith, knew exactly when these documents left the White House. There's closed circuit television everywhere. But the indictment doesn't say it. It doesn't say when. And it doesn't say when because they don't want the public to know when. Because the documents left while Trump was still president. And as a president, he can bring classified home and he can even keep it. And that's something that people don't want to hear, but it's true. And so the way they got around it was not to mention when the documents left. And then what they said in the indictment was, you know, upon leaving the White House, Trump caused the documents to be brought to Mar-a-Lago, which is a very unusual form of causation, especially when you're going to hang 32 felonies, in all, 40 felonies in the indictment, which adds up to 140 years in jail. That's what they were doing to Trump, right? And they said he caused it to happen. While they never even alleged that he even knew what was in any given box. It is really unbelievable the extent that they went. And I'm just giving you some of the examples. There are many more. Now, compare this to Biden's case. Biden got caught with 50 years worth of classified information in his home in Delaware and in his downtown DC office, what was called the Penn Biden Center. The classification levels included top secret code word, very sensitive stuff. I think around 70 of the documents were either secret or top secret, and around 35 of them were top secret. Well, something doesn't get labeled as top secret unless the unauthorized disclosure of that information is reasonably believed to cause exceptionally grave damage to the national security. Biden had 50 years. That's a crime spree that spans half a decade. And some of it was in boxes. But when it was in boxes, they were boxes that had obviously been rummaged through. And a lot of the documents were not in boxes. They were in the first level den, the third level den, in a grocery bag outside his bedroom, in his personal library, in his home. Some of them were in filing folders where the folders had Biden's own handwriting on the labels. So it was clear that someone had gone through the boxes or wherever they were originally, taken the documents into the house and filed them in some instances. So Biden had more classified documents in his house than Trump had from the raid. And to this day, we have no accounting for the total number. Not even the special counsel, who investigated Biden, provides the public with a total number of the classified documents in Biden's home, which is egregious. Uh, Overall, Hur did a good investigation overall, but there were some gaping holes, and that's one of them. Because under the DOJ guidelines for prosecuting these types of cases, one of the primary considerations is the volume of classified information, and it's never provided to the public in the report. The most Hur says is that it was not small. That's a quote from the report. Well, not small could be 60, 600, or 6,000. And to this day, we have no knowledge of the total number of classified documents that were found in Biden's house. To give you another example, Biden had kept note cards from his time as vice president, some of which were highly classified, top secret. They're described in the Hur report as a stack of note cards, when each of those individual note cards that contain classified would have been individual classified documents. We don't know. There could have been 300 note cards. There could have been 200 note cards that were classified. We don't know. And we probably never will. So in addition to all that, there's the question of how that stuff got to Biden's house. Now, when Biden was vice president, and most of what was in his house was from his 8 years as vice president. Some of it was from his time as a senator. You know, when he was vice president, he didn't pack his own boxes either. And packing is chaotic. And I think any reasonable person would say, okay, so maybe he didn't know what was in the boxes and he didn't pack the boxes himself. And in fact, the Hur report uses that as one of the excuses not to prosecute Biden. And I think that's fair. Trump was not given the same fairness.
No.
DOJ took the exact opposite approach to Trump's case by saying that he caused the boxes to be packed. Where in Biden's case, the fact that Biden didn't pack the boxes himself was used as an excuse, even though a lot of the documents had been removed from boxes and brought into Biden's house. And then they said, well, we can't account for how the documents got into Biden's house, which is also just ridiculous. Because if that was really an issue, they would have fingerprinted the documents. Oh, there's no way they wanted to do that. There's no way they wanted to do that because they would have found probably Hunter Biden's fingerprints and Jill Biden's fingerprints, and they didn't want to find Hunter or Jill touching those documents. And so those documents, to our knowledge, and there's no mention of fingerprinting in the whole report. But if it was an issue of how the documents got to where they were, they absolutely should have been fingerprinted. One of the espionage cases I worked on many years ago, the woman's name was Teresa Squillicote. Her case is on 60 Minutes, and you can see the audio, the video online. When the FBI raided her home, they caught her with a very thick secret document, and they fingerprinted the whole document. And they were very happy because in the middle of the document somewhere, they found one of her husband's fingerprints. And so they knew that he had handled the document as well, and he was charged. So that's what they would do in a normal case. But Biden's case was not a normal case. And this is another interesting contrast between the two cases, right? With Trump's case, they moved very quickly to legal compulsion. There were subpoenas, search warrants, grand juries were impaneled. Not with Biden. Everything was done voluntarily, right? There were no subpoenas, no search warrants, no grand jury, no legal compulsion whatsoever. Now, defenders of Biden have said, well, that's because Biden was cooperating with the process, right? And you look at all the talking points, all the public commentary from Biden, his private attorneys, the White House, they all emphasize that Biden was cooperating with the process, which was total BS. Because one, it wasn't a normal process. It's a process that was created just for Biden and was very lenient on him. And then he didn't really cooperate. Let me give you a couple examples. And I have many more of these in the book. I'll just throw out a couple. Biden was questioned by the special counsel Hur. He refused to answer relevant questions. Did you know any of the information in the house was classified? Declined to answer. Declining to answer relevant questions from the federal prosecutor, that's not cooperation. But he refused to answer questions. This is right in the report. I'm not making any of this up. Also, and this is hard to believe, but this really happened. The FBI, even after they had an open criminal investigation, when documents were found originally in the house, they were found in Biden's garage, next to the Corvette. FBI didn't go search the house. They had Biden's private attorneys search the house instead of FBI agents. When have you ever heard of the FBI permitting a potential defendant's lawyers, personal lawyers, to search crime scenes instead of the FBI agents? There's only one case in history I'm aware of, Hillary Clinton's. Hard to believe, right?
Yeah.
Yes, all true. And it's all in the report. No one ever read the damn report. It's 388 pages. People don't have the time for that, except me. I had the time for it. And I had the ability to see things that other people would not see. But these are just a couple of the examples of how the process was not fair at all. And let me give you one more. So, and again, this is hard to believe, but this is true. I'm not making this up. It's in the report. Eventually, after Biden's attorneys, his private attorneys, were permitted to rummage through the crime scene and look for more evidence. After that, quite a while after that, the FBI eventually got around to searching the house. And of course, they found more stuff. They have their faults, but they know how to run a search.
Mm-hmm.
And so they found a lot more stuff. And when they picked up a top secret notebook of Biden's, which contained classified documents in it, in addition to his notes, Biden's private lawyers were present for the FBI search, and Biden's private lawyer informed the FBI that the president had not consented to them seizing the evidence. And then a White House lawyer named Richard Sauber was dispatched up to Delaware. He took physical control of the top secret document and put it in a lock bag. And he kept it for 2 days. And then after that, the FBI was permitted to have the evidence. But the White House lawyer inserted himself into the chain of custody for a major piece of evidence in a criminal investigation. When has that ever happened? To my knowledge, never. But I'll tell you what it's not. It's not cooperation with the process. I have many more examples in my book. Those are just a couple. But I call it the myth of cooperation because there was no true cooperation, and it wasn't even a normal process. It was a heavily biased process that was designed to benefit Biden. And is that really should anybody be surprised by that? The Biden administration in investigating President Biden? How rigorous do you think that's going to be, right? So again, you go back and you compare it to Trump's case, where they very quickly moved to legal compulsion, and they raided his home to get what would amount to be about one box worth of documents. Now, another interesting fact, and I do a very thorough criticism of the indictment of Trump. I'll just again mention a few things. In the indictment, there's, I think, 6 photos of boxes upon boxes upon boxes, right? And everybody's seen these because they're all over the media. Boxes on the stage at Mar-a-Lago. Boxes in the storage room from floor to ceiling at Mar-a-Lago. Boxes are all around the toilet in one of the bathrooms. Boxes upon boxes upon boxes. All these photographs of boxes. Well, why are we looking at all those boxes? They seized, I think, 102 documents on the raid that were classified. Those would fit in one box. So why are we looking at all these boxes? Because a picture's worth 1,000 words. That's why. And they wanted it. It's propaganda. They wanted it ingrained into people's minds that Trump had all these boxes. Now, go back and contrast that with Biden. Biden had donated to the University of Delaware around 2,500 boxes of documents. The FBI did a sampling. They searched around 300 of the boxes, and go figure, they found classified documents in those boxes. But they still never searched all 2,500. And you know what they didn't do? They didn't release any pictures of those boxes. So why is it we've never seen all the photographs of 2,500 boxes? Because they don't want that picture in your mind. Nope. Only with Trump, right? And there's many, many other areas where I contrast the differences in the indictments. I kind of break it down into, there are disparities in the conduct where Trump did nothing illegal. He was president. He owned classified information, and he didn't even pack his boxes. And Biden was a vice president who did not have nearly the same level of authority over classified, and in fact was required to follow the same rules for storage and handling of any other executive branch official. Great disparities in terms of the conduct that was at issue, and Biden's conduct was much, much, much worse. Then there were disparities in how the investigations were handled, right? DOJ bent over backwards to have a very lenient, voluntary process for Biden, and they just turned the screws on Trump. In my book, I call it the siege. And then you get disparities in charging. Biden was not charged with anything, nothing, despite having half a century worth of classified documents all over his house, which was unsecured for most of the time that he had them, where Trump had documents for 18 months, not 50 years, 18 months in a home that was guarded by the Secret Service. It's absolutely ridiculous that Trump would be charged with 40 felonies and Biden not charged at all. And that's just it in a nutshell. But no matter how you slice it or dice it, right? The conduct, the investigations, and the indictments and charging decisions, heavy political bias at every phase. And some of it was hard to prove, right? I had to pour through a lot of documentation, FOIA releases, court records. On the face of things, I think any reasonable person could see how there was inequity in how the two cases were handled. I mean, all you got to do is look at the fact that Biden got a free pass and Trump got charged with 40 felonies that would have put him in jail for 140 years. But for someone with my experience to be able to look at the deeper things, the level of deviousness is what really struck me, right? How devious they were in lying to the American people, lying to the federal judges. And this was all purposeful. I know some of the people in the DOJ National Security Division who are working on this case, and Trump's case and Biden's, and I know that they know better. Devious and purposeful. And I'm very encouraged. I'm obviously happy with the results of the most recent election. And I'm encouraged that someone is going to look into the weaponization of DOJ and the FBI and really the whole executive branch. And I don't know who it's going to be. I don't know if Congress is going to, impanel some kind of committee, or if it's going to be DOJ starts a task force. But I think someone's going to analyze this and look into it. I'm of two minds as to how it should be handled ultimately. I think at a minimum, there needs to be an investigation. And the results of that investigation need to be given to the American people so they can see the truth of what happened and who did what. A lot of my friends on the right are just salivating for prosecutions, right? To prosecute the prosecutors. I'm not entirely of their mind. I think you got to think broader. Did people purposefully break the law to go after Trump and conservatives? Yes, they did. Is what's best for the country to prosecute them, or is it sufficient to just publicly shame them, take their security clearances, make sure they never work, at least not in a Republican administration ever again? Is that enough? Because if you go down the road of prosecuting these people, still we still had 48% of the country voted for Kamala Harris, which is hard to believe. In my opinion, that woman was dumb as a box of rocks. But almost half the country voted for her, which means a lot of people are just voting party line, and that's fine. But those people, nearly half the country, if Trump prosecutes the prosecutors, even if it's meritorious, those prosecutions will be portrayed by 95% of the mainstream media, which is controlled by the Democratic Party, as political persecutions, and it will be upsetting to the country. At least half the country. Half the country will love it. Half the country will use it as a cudgel to say that Trump is a persecutor. Of course, the same people who ignored the fact that Biden and the Democratic Party have been weaponizing the DOJ and FBI, for almost 10 years at least. And I'm not sure it's worth it to put the country through that. Part of me, probably the bigger part of me, would like to see Trump ultimately show mercy to the people who showed him none.
Mm.
And to pardon people after the investigation is done and the truth is known, for him to be gracious and to stay focused on just getting the country back on track, pardoning these people, letting their conduct become publicly known, but not using the criminal justice system just so that people, we can get a little bit more unity in the country going forward.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
Because on one hand, it's just like, yeah, man. I mean, yeah, the indictments, the raid. How does the Secret Service, allow someone to get that close to him with a gun? And then
Twice.
it's like, yeah, and it's like, no, you have to put the screws to them. And then the other thing is like, but bigger picture, if you remove your ego, regardless if you like it, but if you just back up and look at it rationally, regardless of what you want or feel, or it is kind of swerving on the highway. Each successive swerve gets more and more violent. And you
Right.
can say, well, if we don't do this, then they're going to come after whatever advance in 2028. And it's like, and if you do this, then you're gonna, if you do act like a tyrant, you're gonna give other people legitimate reason to view you as a tyrant and be like, well, you prosecuted them, even if it's done in response to what they did to Trump. It's a hard one to look at because I mean, I feel it in my own mind. At one point, I'm like, yeah, man, you gotta burn them at the stake. I mean, this you have to eradicate it. On the other hand, I'm like, gun to my head, I cannot, lie detector, I can't say honestly that I think this will solve it. And like, no, regardless of what I want, it deep down, I know that it will just crack back even farther. And it's eventually what happens when does a car stop when it flips and everyone
Right.
dies?
Yeah. And I can tell you, I've been doing a lot of speaking recently, and it's mostly conservative audiences. And my message on this is not popular, and I can tell.
Yeah.
But I keep trying because I believe it probably is what's best. But then I back a little bit. I back up a little bit and I say, well, one thing we can all agree on is that there should be an investigation.
Yeah.
And the results of that investigation need to be made public. And and we need to know names. We need to know who did what. And everybody agrees on that. And so at a minimum, we can take a measured approach, right? And so you do that. You get that done. And then and only then do you decide whether to also prosecute some people. I mean, because maybe it is possible. Maybe some of these things were so egregious that you can't not prosecute. Um, but again, my personal opinion is the default should be pardon them. Show mercy to the people who showed you none. Be gracious, turn the other cheek. Because the lessons will be learned um, just by the mere fact that the public will have the facts. And then you let them express their approval or disapproval at the voting booth.
Yeah.
Um, So, but at a minimum, you take a measured approach, right? You take it in phases. And the first phase is the investigation, and then you see what you find. I think that's at least that part we can all agree on.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in 4 years or 10 years, they might be looking back and saying like, "Man, I wish we had gone scorched earth because X, Y, and Z happened." But you can't do that. You got to look at where you are now, and we don't exist in a vacuum. It's not that America can screw up and then we can just put it on ice for a little bit. No, you live in a dynamic, changing world with other empires, Russia and China and India, and we're what 5% of the world's population. Like, it doesn't come to a standstill. So you also can't just put this, on, a medically induced coma. It's like you do have to keep moving forward, and yeah, I don't know. That's gonna be a needle that they're gonna have to thread. It can't go unpunished and it can't go uninvestigated. But
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with
I'm
that.
with you though. You also can't, as much as you might have like not you, but like as much as you might have like righteous anger to be like, no, we gotta screw them all. Okay, sure, but there are going to be people who are kids right now who grow up, and in the same way, I was born in '90, and I don't really remember much before Bush. You're gonna have people who are be like, you could explain to them what happened to Trump, but they're gonna be like, "Hey, man, I grew up and I just saw, a Republican president raiding Democrats, and that's what I grew up with, and screw these people," and they wouldn't even be wrong. So it's like, it's you do have to do as much as like. It's like even the pedophile gets like a fair trial. You can't just, as much as you want to, you can't just go up and shoot him. Like you have to. And that's that's a tough thing. I don't know. That's a very tough thing. It's not in some like weak moral of like we have to take the higher road. No, no, not that. It's you just rationally have to look at it and be like, what is best for the long-term health of the country?
Exactly. And
It's probably not going scorched earth.
what is, yes, and so then what is the appropriate punishment? And I wouldn't pretend to
Yeah,
know because I don't know the extent of all the conduct yet.
sure.
But I do know that using the criminal justice system for punishment is very, it comes with optics,
Yeah.
and you have to be careful about that, is all I would say. Very careful, because there are other forms of punishment that are short of using the criminal justice system. That's just one, it's obviously the most common form of punishment and the one that we all know the best, but there are ramifications to using it, and we should not ignore those ramifications.
Mm,
And we also have to be careful about the impulse for vengeance.
yeah.
Um, that can be very damaging, and you got to ask yourself, at some point, do we want to encourage our fellow citizens to be more thoughtful and hopefully bring more unity to the nation? If that's the overall goal, maybe you let a couple people go who otherwise maybe should have been prosecuted just because of the damage it's going to cause, right? In terms of alienating the citizenry from each other and giving them a cause celeb, rather than using it as an opportunity to bring people together and through forgiveness.
It's kind of like the idea of, terrorist attack A happens, called 9/11, and you're full of righteous anger and you're like, fuck them. And you go in and you do hellfire. Yeah, yeah, no, you are justified. But you have things like blowback where you have some dude in, Kandahar who's never seen a phone before, and all he knows is his dad got vaporized by a missile. And he is now going to say, for the rest of my life, I will do anything to enact vengeance. And he's not wrong. If he enacts vengeance, we are going to kill him. We're not wrong. At a certain point, it's not like what is right, what is wrong, what is ethical, what is, above it. But you have to start looking at it rationally and go, if my interest is in the survivability and robust health of the system, this country that we're in, this, general social agreement, what do you do? and that's a lot harder to
Yeah, and
do.
look at some of the instances from our own history. Uh,
We're allies
Pres
with Japan and Germany.
President Lincoln, did he imprison Confederate generals? No. Do you remember? The only example I can think of true insurrection in our nation's history was Shays' Rebellion.
Mhm.
Um, Daniel Shays was pardoned, and he led an armed rebellion.
Yeah, and it's like, and if you go back and like put yourself in that microcosm, you could be like, no, this guy has to die. You have to crucify him. Versus we're looking back, 160, 200 years later, and we're going, well, no, the country's still robust and put together. And it's like, well, then which one is better for the system? And that's hard because your ego gets in there and you go, no, I want vengeance. But you have
Yes.
to ask yourself what is more important. And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, but you just have to ask
Yeah.
yourself, am I more focused on personal vengeance or am I more focused on the long-term survivability of the country? Which one do you, and I if Trump wins scorched earth, I've never been hit with a bullet in front of my family. I would imagine I'd be probably pretty pissed. And like I don't even disagree with that, but you have to ask yourself, it's like it's like am I successful? What's your definition? Is your definition that you make this much money, or is it that you have a loving wife and kids, or is it that you're a good member of your community? There's really no right answer. It's just how do you define it? And then you have to ask yourself,
Right.
okay, what do I define? It's, did my grandparents make $1 zillion? No, but they raised 6 kids and had a ton of grandchildren, and I would like to think raised us all well. Yeah, I'd say in that sense, they're successful. There's no right or wrong answer, but you have to ask yourself, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to get vengeance? Okay, well, if that's the case, sure, send Delta Force in and kill everybody. Or is it, I want to see the Republic go for another 250 years? You're just going to take a lot of, your ego's going to take a bruising. It also doesn't mean be an idiot. That also doesn't mean, just go, bygones be bygones. No, like you said, do an investigation, make it public, and you know, where it is necessary or deserved, prosecute. But again, it's just how do you define what it is you're doing? If it's vengeance, then you can do vengeance. If it's the long-term survivability of the Republic, then it's the long-term survivability of the Republic. And there are smart ways to do it, but it's, you know, and again, I don't think I could blame this administration if they did go scorched earth. That being said, don't be surprised in 10, 20 years when people rightfully say, hey, my dad was a Democratic governor. And, I remember my 10th birthday when Navy SEALs kicked down my door. He's not wrong. That kid's not wrong. And if that kid grows up to want vengeance, he's not wrong. So it's just, it's what do you want to happen? And that's a lot of responsibilities on their shoulders that I'm happy I don't have to make. No decisions I don't have to make, but it is I had Dr. Robert Malone on here the other week. He's been on here a zillion times, and he was saying like it's gonna be the most difficult exhibition of restraint to be Christian in the coming years, and can it be done? And I don't know. I hope so because ultimately that is what we should want, right? Is the long-term survivability of the country that I got to grow up in, that my parents got to grow up in, that my grandparents got to grow up in. I should ethically pay it forward so that other people can experience this, you know? I don't know. I have no idea. And like you said, I think most importantly, we also don't have the full scope of what's going on or what has gone on. We have no idea. For all we know, you and I get read into it and we come out the next day and we're like, yeah, you got to hang them all. They're evil. Like they put
Yes.
bombs in cities. It's like they release COVID. You're like, oh, well, I mean, fuck. All right. But but it also might not be that. And I don't know. And I guess that kind of comes full circle to, you know, I hope they do the right thing and don't hide behind classification and say you peasants are too, you can't know what happened, but we need to kill all the Democrats. And it's like, no, now we're kind of back where we started. So I don't know. Go buy the book, everybody. I don't know. That's my pitch. I don't know. Um, yeah, man, that was awesome. I appreciate your time.
Yeah.
You're
Anytime.
yeah,
Let me
yeah,
know if you
dude.
want to do this again.
Yeah,
And
no,
meanwhile,
I'll send you an email after this. Let's schedule another
yeah,
one.
please do. And then also for your viewers, listeners, please do read the book. I didn't write this book for fame or fortune. In fact, I had to take a chunk of money out of my retirement fund to get this thing published. And I have no regrets.
Yeah.
It was a duty I had because I was uniquely situated to see some things that other people would not. And I wanted people to know the truth. And I think, even though it deals with some complicated or complex subjects, I think I explained it all at a level that anyone could understand. And I'm interested in getting feedback. And so I encourage people, even if you don't read the book, check out my website because I'm starting to load all of my research on there because people can't believe what they're reading. And so I'm putting my research there so they can check it to see that it's all true. So you'd learn quite a bit just from looking at my website. It's sweeneyjb.com. And if you want to talk about any of it, please email me. I respond to every email. There's a contact form at the bottom of the website. It goes right to my email.
I'll send you an email after this. Yeah, I'll circle back in like January or something, and maybe we'll have more of an idea of what's. I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, we know most of the appointees, but I imagine as more appointees get, I don't know, confirmed or verified, that we'll maybe have a better idea of what's coming. So I'll shoot you an email. Let's definitely do another one.
Yeah, last month I was on a show called Jesse Waters Prime Time. I
Oh
was actually
yeah,
on,
yeah,
yeah, I was on twice. And one of the times I was at the studio, they actually put makeup on your face and
yeah,
stuff. And so I'm at the studio and I'm in the waiting room, and Lindsey Graham was in there, and he's on the Judiciary Committee.
yeah,
And so I said to him, if you end up investigating, the weaponization of DOJ, please call me as a witness.
yeah,
I would be honored. Um, and I've at this point, at least for this case, the classified documents case, I have literally written the book
yeah,
on
yeah.
it. And I would challenge anyone to criticize my work. I would love to publicly debate people, but
Oh
I
yeah.
can't find anyone who'll even publicly debate me on this.
Fair enough.
Um, yeah,
All right, awesome. Hey, dude, yeah, let's absolutely do it. And yeah, I'll be I hope to see you as an expert witness. And
me too.
just make sure you plug my podcast. Yeah. All
I
right,
will
dude.
do that.
All right, man. Thank you so much. I'll send you this link. We'll schedule another one for sometime in January. And guys, the book is Dangerous Injustice. Please go in the description. Please go buy it, give it a listen. And yeah, man, until next time. Thank you so much for your time.
All right, thanks for your time.
All right, brother. Guys, thank you so much for watching.